it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Haunted Cafe. My name is Amber, and today we are going to be reading The Jewelry Box by J.A. Heath. I actually met the author through Facebook. He was looking for someone to, kind of publish his stories or either on podcasts or whatnot, and he sent me a few of them. I really enjoyed all of the writing, all of the short stories. But I picked one that I really liked in particular, and so now I'm going to read it for you guys. Before we begin, down in the description box below is going to be a link to his author page on Facebook, so you guys can go and follow him. And just, if you enjoy the content, make sure you follow wherever else his works are published. So, without further ado, let's begin. The lights in the house were on, but the man who lived there had already died. Jeff Fenstein was sorting through the items left behind by the gentleman. It wasn't a glorious career, rummaging through the deceased belongings, but it was his job. Estate sales, auctions, and total disposals, they did it all. Jeff's only task was ensuring everything was inventoried and appropriately labeled. The rest of the crew would come in tomorrow and move the items that could be sold. He began in the kitchen. Candace, a friend and co-worker, helped him as the two hurried to sort through the entirety of the house. The plates and silverware need to be labeled for sale. They're in good condition. And as for the mixer and toaster, they're trash. They're so old they look like antiques. Candace said with a chuckle, trying to make light that they were rummaging through a dead man's leftovers. Jeff picked up the utensils and moved them over to the left side of the kitchen counter. He turned back around and grabbed the mixer. With a grunt of hot air, he picked it up and cradled it to his chest. The weight of the old appliance bear down on him. "Now I see why you wanted to do the paperwork," Jeff joked as he tried to maintain his grip. The mixer was heavier than it looked. With an awkward stance, he lugged the metal contraption to the front door. Struggling to grasp the doorknob, he fumbled with the knob with his fingers. After several attempts, he finally got a grip on the brass handle and turned it. As the door slowly moved, he sighed in relief and carefully walked down the front steps to the lawn, where a dumpster bin sat filled with trash. He strained as he lifted the hulking mass of metal over his head and pitched it into the waste container. After hearing a loud clang, he clapped his hands like a weightlifter that had just finished a new personal best. "Phew, that was rough," he said as he tried to catch his breath. Candace appeared from the dark threshold of the house, shaking her head at his comical display. "All right, Tarzan, now that the kitchen is finished, let's start in the attic and work our way down. We've got just a couple of hours left until it gets dark. I don't want to be in this house all night," she said. Candace turned and disappeared back into the dead man's house. "She's so bossy," Jeff thought. "It's a good thing I like her." He smiled and stretched his arms out as he loosened his muscles from the strenuous task he had just completed. Jeff hurried to catch up to his coworker. As he entered the house, Candace was already standing at the top of the stairs. "Hurry up, Jeff. I want to get this over with. You know how much I hate attics," she said with visible discomfort. Okay, I'm coming." Jeff quickly bounded the stairs and met Candace at the doorway to the attic. "All right, you first, strong man," Candace giggled with a little schoolgirl's laugh. "Fine, scaredy cat." Jeff opened the door to the attic, revealing yet another staircase. However, this one was much more narrow. Without hesitation, he climbed into the abyss above. The house's age showed with every step that he took. The stairs creaked and moaned from the weight of his body as he moved further up. After the cacophony of sounds, he reached the top and turned around to call his friend below. "All right, your turn. Come on up." There was a long silence. Do I have to?" Candace finally spoke with a tremble. "It's a two-person job," Jeff said as he shook his head. "She is a handful." Jeff looked around the attic. "It's fine, Candace. There's nothing scary up here, I promise. It's just a bunch of boxes and some old furniture. Another pause followed. Then Jeff heard Candace's footsteps as she hesitantly crept up the staircase. What felt like an eternity passed by as Candace finally reached the top of the stairs. See, it isn't that bad up here, Jeff chuckled as he looked at her nervous expression. Whatever. Let's just get this over with. You know that rooms like this give me the creeps, she replied as a shiver went down her spine. The two looked around and planned how to tackle the chore. In agreement, Candace and Jeff decided that the large white moving blankets needed to be removed to know what they were dealing with. Jeff moved over to the first item and began to remove the large veil of a bed sheet from over it. As he pulled the sheet off, a large mirror was revealed. Dense oak lined its outer edges, and its surface was still in perfect condition. The wood bore engravings of branches and swirls, making the piece look dated but extravagant. It was a beautiful family heirloom that seemed to have been long forgotten, left to wither away in the cobwebs. That needs to be sold. I'm sure the family could get a good sum of money from that. It's a wonderful piece, Candace said with a pleased smile. Jeff moved to the next blanket and began to pull it off. While removing it, he heard something crash to the floor. As he gathered the blanket up in his arms, he noticed a small jewelry box lying in pieces on the floor. It must have been sitting on top, he said with a grimace. It's okay. It happens. It's just part of the process, Candace tried to reassure him. But Jeff felt terrible about breaking the family keepsake. He bent down and picked up the remnants of the broken box and tried to piece them back together with no luck. It was irreparable. He noticed engravings on the lower half of the box and turned it over as he tried to find the maker's mark. When he turned it upside down, a small stream of dust spilled onto the attic floor. He watched as the dust fell to the ground, swirling and shimmering in the sunlight that peered through the small attic window on the far side of the room. It reminded him of how life was, just a brief gust of wind, and then it was over. It must have been a family hand-me-down. I feel awful that I broke it, even if it was an accident, Jeff said. It's okay, you didn't know. Now come on, let's finish up. The pair continued to sort through the remainder of items. One by one, each piece was labeled for the rest of the crew to come in and take care of. As they finished marking the last few, Jeff asked Candace if he could return to the second story. He was still feeling awful about breaking the jewelry box. He couldn't explain it, but something was heavy on his heart. Are you sure you're okay up here? He asked. Yeah, I'll be fine. You've worked pretty hard today. Go ahead. I'll be down in a minute. Jeff descended back down the noisy staircase. As he approached the last step, he saw a figure dash past the doorway. Adrenaline rushed into his veins, and his instincts took over. There's not supposed to be anyone else here. He flew into the threshold and turned his head from side to side, scanning for the shadowy figure. He suddenly remembered that Candace was still in the attic and shouted up to her. Hey, we're the only ones here, right? Yeah, no one else is supposed to be here. Why? Candace said, sounding concerned. Trying to keep his coworker calm, Jeff replied. Just making sure. Didn't know if the crew was supposed to come by today. No, no one else will be here until tomorrow. Okay. Jeff began to panic as he focused on the intruder. He needed to know where whoever it was had disappeared to. He had to protect his friend. Carefully and quietly, Jeff searched the rooms of the house. One door at a time, he opened them and looked around inside. Nothing. He checked the entire house and began to think that maybe his mind had chosen to play a trick on him. On his last attempt to prove himself wrong, he studied the front door. Locked. Maybe I've just been working too much. Knowing that no one else was in the house, Jeff moved to join up with his coworker in the attic. As he turned around, he saw his shadow on the floor. It stood as a dark reflection cast down from the sunlight that peeked through the glass decor around the front door. How many years had it been since he had noticed his shadow? But there it was, staring back at him with a face of darkness. He had forgotten that he even had a shadow. Jeff imagined it was giggling at him from the wild goose chase he had just endured. It had witnessed it all. He looked at where its face would be if it had one and felt it gaze deep into his soul. He shook himself out of a daydream and returned to Candace. When he had reached the top step, he asked, "Are you finished yet?" "Yeah, I'm sorry. I stumbled across a book as I was cleaning out a dresser. It's weird. The pages are filled with a bunch of drawings. There are no words written in it except on the last page. Here, take a look." She handed the book over to him. He flipped through the pages. The book was filled with different drawings, some eloquent, while others were disturbing. Whomever's book this had once belonged to seemed to have been plagued by something of the mind. He flipped through until he came across the last page. A single sentence stood in the middle. He read it aloud. "It followed me." He looked over at Candace with a confusion plastered on his face. "What does that mean?" "How should I know? It's not my book. Maybe it was a diary or something? You know, not everyone always writes in diaries. Some people draw in them." "Eh, I guess that makes sense," he said as he studied the page, looking deeper as if he could try to figure out the mystery just by staring at it. "It's pretty creepy, though. What do you want to do with it?" he asked. "Put it with the undecided items. Maybe one of the family members will want to hold on to it as a keepsake or something." "All right." Jeff placed the book in with the other items and then returned to Candace. "So are we done?" "Yeah, let's get out of here. We'll get the rest of the stuff tomorrow." "Good. I'm ready to go. Something about this place doesn't feel right," he said as a line of goosebumps dotted his arms. "I thought I was supposed to be the scaredy cat," Candace smirked. "Don't worry. You still are," Jeff said as he shook the feeling off. They returned down the stairs and turned the lights off as they prepared to leave. The couple walked out onto the front porch. Candace pulled a key from her pocket and locked the door. After ensuring it was secure, she turned around and looked at Jeff. "Need a ride?" "Nah, I live just a few blocks from here. I'll walk." "Thanks for the offer, though," he chuckled. Candace laughed and waved to him as she got into her car. He watched her drive away until she disappeared around a turn. Jeff walked down the pathway and headed home. As he walked down the sidewalk, his thoughts about the jewelry box returned. It had to be an antique. He continued down the street, passing house after house as he beat himself up about destroying the family's treasure. Jeff felt a wrench turn in his stomach. He began to feel a beady pair of eyes burning holes into the back of his head. Something told him that he was being followed. He started to walk faster, but he could feel whoever it was breathing down the back of his neck as they kept pace with him. Unable to withstand the feeling any longer, he turned around with his fists up, ready to defend himself. But there was no one. He stood alone on the empty sidewalk, confused as to why his body had lied to him. What's going on? Jeff returned to walking down the sidewalk until he arrived at his house. By the time he opened his door, the sun had already begun to set. Nighttime was crawling over the neighborhood. His stomach growled. He knew he was hungry, but didn't feel like he could eat. The feeling he had from the jewelry box still burned in his chest. Thinking that maybe some food would appease his unease after all, he headed to the kitchen. After prepping himself some food, Jeff fixed his plate and sat in the dining room. When he lifted his fork to his mouth for a bite, he caught a glimpse of another figure dashing into the darkness of the living room from the corner of his eye. Irritated by his degrading mental state, Jeff refused to give in to his mind tricks and instead stared down at his plate. "I need some rest. I'll feel better after a good night's sleep." Jeff got up and brushed his food into the trash can. As he laid the dishes in the sink, he peered out into the backyard from the kitchen window. A set of yellow, reflective eyes stared back at him. "Damn raccoons," he muttered under his breath as he banged his fists against the glass window. The eyes bounced and quickly disappeared into the woods. Frustrated, Jeff headed to his bedroom and changed into his pajamas. Feeling exhausted, he lifted the cover on his bed and eased himself in as he sank into a comfortable cloud of his sheets. He pulled his sheets up just below his chin and took a deep breath. The warm embrace of a hug from his sheets comforted him. Jeff reached over to his nightstand and grabbed the remote on his nightstand. He turned it on and flicked through the channels until he turned it over to one of his favorite shows. After a few minutes, Jeff was fighting to stay awake. He rolled over to face the opposite side of the room, the light of the TV painting his silhouette onto the wall in front of him. The closet door made little ruffles in the body of his shadow. He looked into the darkness of its presence. It stared back at him, empty of emotion. He thought about his shadow and how it had no reason but to simply exist. He thought about his darkened silhouette and wondered why people even had them in the first place. Why? It was just a silly thought to have. Shadows are just a connection to a mask that captures the light emitted from the sun, a wall between the forces of nature. They are nothing more than a signature left by something that was once there. They serve as the scum of the earth beneath our feet, having never felt the warmth of light. Jeff drifted off to sleep with these thoughts still playing in his mind, but while he lay in bed, his body began to move. No, not his body, his shadow. It slithered into the closet, where the darkness compressed itself inside and began to manifest. The room's temperature dropped to an unequivocal cold that Jeff would have noticed had he not been wrapped so heavily in his blanket. If he had woken up and opened his eyes, he would have seen his breath and known something was wrong. But Jeff didn't. He laid there, unaware of the terror that lurked in the darkness just a few feet away from him. His shadow writhed and disfigured, then retook a new shape, something beyond that of a human form. The doorknob turned slowly, and the hinges creaked as they screamed to warn Jeff of the beast emerging from the door. A deep sleep had taken him and tried to save him, but Jeff's sweet dreams turned into cold-blooded nightmares within his room. The monster emerged with long, jagged claws that reached out from the darkness. They dug into the walls as they hoisted the monster's body from the black abyss. Taloned feet came next as the monster crept out of the darkness, leaving a trail of marks behind as it moved to his bedside. It towered over him, the monster's head almost touching the ceiling. Yellow eyes looked over him as it lowered its head to inches from his face. They were the same eyes that Jeff had mistaken for a raccoon. It had followed him home, unleashed from the jewelry box he had mistakenly broken. It opened its mouth, revealing row after row of sharp, serrated teeth. A spindle of drool hung from its mouth and dripped onto the comforter around his feet. It reared its claws back and, with one quick motion, sank them into him. Jeff awoke from the sudden sharp pain and floundered to let out a scream as he coughed blood, his lungs punctured and filling with blood. But he gargled and choked, unable to make a sound as the monster tore into him. Swipe after rapid swipe, his flesh was torn and removed, its weight bearing down upon him. He was forced to bear witness as the wretched beast devoured him. He felt the cold kiss of death, and his body stopped twitching. His white bed sheets, ripped and tattered to shreds, turned crimson red. He should have never broken that jewelry box, even if it was an accident. Maybe if he had just fixed it, the monster would have returned home, and he could have survived. But it doesn't matter now, because he released it, and it followed him. Now it hides in the shadows looking for its next victim. Now about the author. J.A. Heath resides in Greenville, South Carolina, under the guise of a pen name. There he lives with his partner and their three beautiful children. When he's not caught up in his next story, he can usually be found outside tending his garden. Previously, J.A. Heath has been published by Bewildering Stories, and in the forthcoming in the Horror Zines Book of Monsters. Want to see more from J.A. Heath? You can find him on Facebook. Alright guys, so that was The Jewelry Box by J.A. Heath. I really enjoyed that short story. It reminded me of a few episodes back of the Shadow People that Alan and I were talking about. And it gives you a new perspective to the Shadow People lore. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the other stories that he had. Hopefully, you'll be able to hear those eventually. So make sure you go down to J.A. Heath's Facebook page. It's in the link in the description below. And follow him because honestly, his stories are amazing. I feel like this one was just like a tip of the iceberg for many, many good stories. But yeah, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Sorry, I'm not the best narrator. I tried my best. If you saw the unedited version, you would like I don't even know. But hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And thank you guys so much for listening. And we will see you in the next episode. Catch you later.